I apologize for that. This morning, I wanted to speak to you about the subject of modesty. And as we talk about this, let's see if I get this to work here. This is something that the elders have asked me to address with all of you. And there's just so much in this subject, we can't deal with all of it today. I don't have answers to everyone's questions, but we're going to deal with it, I think, in a way that will remind us of the way that scriptures teach us about being a Christian and being proper and discreet and modest as we talk about our adornment. You'll notice the title, if you will, is Making a Claim. And that's going to be key to the way that the Bible presents the subject of modesty. We present ourselves to public, we present ourselves in the world with making a claim. We want to show Jesus Christ in us. And so that affects the way that we talk, that affects the way that we live and behave, and that also affects the way that we dress and put ourselves out to the world. But when we talk about Christianity and the subject of modesty, it is a difficult subject. It can be a slippery slope. Let me illustrate that and why this is a difficult subject with a few different illustrations. The first one, I don't know why this thing ain't working this morning. The first one is to deal with a survey that I found online. All right, well, we're going to do it manually. And this survey took hundreds of men that profess faith in the Bible, faith in Jesus Christ, and it gave them certain statements about modesty. And it asked them whether they agreed or disagreed. And you can see there's some options there as to how much they agree or don't agree, or if they're just simply neutral. They don't have an opinion on it. And so here is the first statement. Hundreds of Christian men were interviewed here. And so here's the first statement. Modesty is important for all girls, regardless of their height, weight, or build. And I want you to notice the results here. Pretty clear. Everyone thinks that's important. No matter a girl's size, height, stature, you can see that there's an agreement here. Let's talk about the second statement here. Guys notice whether a girl is dressed modestly or not. Agree or disagree? Well, again, we see it all pretty much in agreement, right? And you say, well, what's the point here? Well, I think the point is that when we talk about modesty and the Bible, that we as New Testament Christians understand the Bible teaches it. And it is an important subject. We're all in agreement with that. But notice when we start talking about the specifics, what exactly is modesty? So here's the next statement. Is it okay to show your stomach when wearing a swimsuit? That old debate, one-piece swimsuit or two-piece swimsuit or no swimsuit, right? Well, notice the results. Not quite as demonstrative as they were when we were just asking about modesty. Now, when we try to define that modesty, notice the scale, it's not the same. There's answers on both sides. There's agreements and disagreements on both sides. I want you to notice the results of this one, kind of the same thing. Some mixed agreement and no agreement to what? Skirts that fall above the knee are immodest. Again, some would say they disagree with that. Most would say they agree, but as we get into the specifics, that's where we get in this slippery slope. What is modesty? How does the Bible define it? Form-fitting skirts are a stumbling block regardless of length. Again, notice we don't have that all on one side agreement. I was in an audience one time when a preacher was preaching on the subject of modesty. And his whole goal here, one of his major premises, was to deal with a very common attitude that Christians have, especially young Christians. And I just want to say before we move on, I think we all know this, the Bible does address the subject modesty and mostly to women, but we know that men can be immodestly dressed as well. But he was talking about young ladies that often don't want to dress modestly because, well, they see modest clothes as ugly, not fashionable, drab, right? And his whole point was you can dress modestly and still have attractive-looking clothes. Now, he probably would have been okay if he would have stopped right there, but he decided to illustrate what he meant. And he used his wife and his daughter, and he showed pictures of the garments that they had purchased and they were wearing and so forth. The problem with that is at the end of that particular lesson, as I was leaving, I heard a grumbling that not all the Christians there were agreeing with what he showed up on the screen was modest. It's a difficult subject when we try to be specific. And it's not just the Christian world that has difficulty with this. I remember when my oldest son Kyle was in high school, and we're talking around 2015 here. He went to a public high school, and this public high school, believe it or not, had a dress code. And they would enforce this dress code. Now, this dress code, as it was defined, I assure you would not be the dress code we would agree with, but it was a dress code for a public school, which in itself, I think most of us would say, is kind of amazing. And so there was this school dance, and they were going to enforce the dress code, and certain kids were sent home because their clothing did not fit the dress code of the school district. Well, there was a certain cheerleader, and she decided, you know what? I'm going to wear my cheerleading skirt to the dance. Now, this is the cheerleading skirt that the school says you need to purchase this skirt as your cheerleading outfit. And this is the same skirt that all the cheerleaders purchased. And this is the same skirt that all the cheerleaders on Friday night wore as they rallied the crowd behind the football team. So she was going to wear that. Well, those that were enforcing the dress code had no idea that was the cheerleading skirt. And I think you know what happened. She was sent home because her skirt was too short. And there was an uproar on parents on both sides of that situation. And so that raises this question. Does the Bible give a specific dress code? And what I mean by that is does it tell us, hey, the clothes have to be this long or it has to be this type of clothes? And the answer to that is really not really. Now, I realize that Christians throughout the years have used many passages to show some kind of standard. Some of these passages aren't dealing with modesty at all. Some of them are. And some of these passages, I would say, you can get maybe by way of principle, you can get an idea of lengths and so forth. But that's very, very different than setting up this whole system of a dress code and now enforcing that among Christians. I think we need to be careful of that. And I'm going to show you one of these passages in just a second. We're going to look at Exodus 28, 42, 43 that is used oftentimes to set up part of the dress code. But remember, the Jewish leaders and the Pharisees, they wanted to figure out how to keep the Sabbath. And when you go to the Old Testament, you know that there's a command of the Sabbath that they are to rest and to do no work. Now, there are a few passages that show us some people that got in trouble with that, picking up sticks and so forth. But let's be honest. The Old Testament does not define work in regards to the Sabbath. It's not real clear there. And so here comes the Jewish leaders, and they're like, we gotta help these people. We gotta define work for them. And as they start putting these specifics that are not found in Scripture, Sabbath day journey, what constitute work and what doesn't. Well, no doubt, when Jesus comes on the scene, one of the biggest charges against Jesus is he breaks the Sabbath. But he doesn't break the Sabbath. He breaks their little man-made rules and restrictions about it, like you can't heal someone on the Sabbath. And we need to be careful of that. We want to teach the Bible. We want to teach modesty, but we want to use good interpretation, good Bible study techniques. So one of these passages, Exodus 28, 42 for 43, is dealing with the priestly garments. And there, they are told, you shall make for them, the priest, linen breeches to cover their bare flesh. They shall reach from the loins even to the thighs. And they shall be on Aaron and his sons when they enter the tent of meeting, or when they approach the altar to minister to the holy place, so that they do not incur guilt and die. It shall be a statute for them, statute forever to him and to his descendants after him. Now here is a passage that is dealing with clothing, and it is dealing with the covering of the flesh, that idea. And some people have used this as kind of, here's the dress code. Now, can this passage help us with some idea of length? It can. But if we start using it as a specific dress code, well, we get some problems. Number one, this is a command for the garments of a Levitical priest as he works at the tabernacle. That's not quite the same context that we're talking about, is it? It isn't. Secondly, you'll notice that they are to make these linen breeches that go from the loins, which is kind of the waist area, down to the thigh, right? Down to the thighs. Well, here's your thigh, right? It doesn't say go down to the knee, but that's often the way we interpret it. But it goes down to the thighs. Well, how far? If I go halfway to the thigh, well, I'm still reaching that thigh area. And third problem is that these are the underwear, the undergarments of the priest. They actually had another garment that surrounded that, and this was a fail-safe, especially as they came to the altar and walked up the steps of the altar, kind of like a woman wearing a dress or a skirt. She doesn't climb a ladder, does she? Because the higher she gets, the more she's in danger of exposing her nakedness. So, can we use this as an idea of length? I think we can. Should we use this to enforce a biblical dress code? I don't think we can do that. I don't think that's good biblical interpretation. So with that in mind, let's talk about the passages of the New Testament that deal with the subject of modesty. And even that is kind of interesting. It does not appear that modesty, as far as it comes to clothing, was a major problem in the Old Testament. You don't read a whole lot about this problem of modesty, and there's not a whole lot of passages about it. Even in the New Testament, there isn't a whole lot said about modesty and the problem of modesty, and there are basically two passages that we use in this subject because they are dealing with a problem of modesty in the New Testament church. One of those passages is by Paul, and the other is by Peter, and interestingly, they say almost exactly the same thing. But here's another problem. The issue that they're dealing with is not exactly parallel, to the issue that we often deal with in our modern day world. In other words, when you hear Christians that are upset about immodesty, it doesn't really fit what's dealing with here, because we're dealing with problems of people wearing what? Too little, too short, too form-fitting, what we might call underdressing. The issue that Paul and Peter are dealing with is overdressing, we might call it. Wearing certain garments that, what? With the focus of wanting to be seen by the world merely for your outward adornment. What we're going to see in these passages is that modesty is a condition of the heart. It is the heart that is so important in determining how we're going to present ourselves to the world in our clothing, in our speech, and in our behavior. So that first passage we want to look at is in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9, and in verse 10. And here in this passage we know that Timothy has talked to the men about how they are to conduct themselves and how they are to lift up holy hands as they pray. And now he deals with women. And he talks about them usurping authority over men and how they are to learn. And part of that, he says, likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as befits women making a claim to godliness. You can see the first part of this I've highlighted. This is the whole crux of it. Making a claim to godliness. In other words, when you decide to go shopping for clothes, when you go to your closet and pick out clothes, what's on your mind? Are you wanting to, I want people to really see me as beautiful, as gorgeous, and so I have to wear these clothes to make that statement? Well, if that's it, you're not making the right claim. Paul says you don't have the right heart. You don't have the right goal. We dress in such a way that we're making a claim to godliness. And that's why we have that title this morning, Making a Claim. That's what we do when we dress. We're making a claim. We're making a statement. We're trying to show the world what? Jesus Christ in us. We are light. We are salt. We are the influencers of the world. We are God's Word. And part of that is by the way we dress. So how do we figure it out? What Paul and Peter are saying is that we do it with our brain. We're making a claim with our brain, meaning with our heart. I want you to think about that Sabbath command that wasn't well defined. You shall not work, you shall rest. How did they figure it out? They figured it out with their heart. A heart dedicated to God. Did they set up rules and regulations? No. Did they push limits? No, they did not. And the same is used for us. Modesty, adornment, is first and foremost a condition of the heart and the goal that you want to present to the world. If you find someone that continually dresses immodest, that's only a symptom of the overall problem. You want to fix that, you start fixing the heart. You start encouraging the heart. You keep teaching them, right? That's what's going to bring that change. Let's talk as well about these words, not with. Here, Paul and Peter are doing specifically with situation of that day. And he says, let your adornment not be with braided hair, gold, or pearls, or costly garments. Let's go over to the second passage in Peter. Peter says, and let not your adornment be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing of gold jewelry or putting on dresses. But notice, this is what it's supposed to be. But let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. Now, what I have up here is the New American Standard. And the New American Standard translators put the word merely in there. Interestingly, that word merely is not in the King James, but it is in the New King James, inserted in there. And you will find many commentators that agree with that merely. And what they're trying to do is tell you that they don't believe that Peter, and probably even Paul, are saying that you can't wear these things. What they're saying is, if you wear these things, they can't be all that you're about. They can't merely be your adornment. And if they're going to block the claim you're trying to make, don't wear them at all. Now realize that there are some Christians that would say, no, you can't wear any of those things. You can't do any of those things. Paul says very clearly not to. The problem we have with that is, how do you define all that? The braiding of hair. Well, can I put it in a ponytail? Can I wear pigtails? What's the limit here of the braiding of the hair? Who sets that limit? All right, it says not wearing gold jewelry. Paul also mentioned pearls. Can I wear silver jewelry? Is it all jewelry? Costly dresses, fine garments, dresses. Again, you can see the slippery slope as we get into this. What might be a costly dress for one may be pennies on the dollar to someone else. I really think that the idea is, figure it out with your heart. If your whole goal is to wear the jewelry so people think, man, look at how attractive she is. Or in today's world, look at how attractive he is. That's not the claim to godliness we want to make. And then there's these words: proper, modestly, discreetly. Let's look at these a little bit. I mean, proper. Is that well defined? What is proper? Again, what is proper for one may not be proper for another. Let's talk a little bit about modestly. Modestly is a word that carries with it reverence, that we adorn ourselves with reverence to God, or as the King James has a word, shamefastness. Shamefastness is that modesty that is fast, doesn't mean you're quick. It means rooted in character, says Vines. The complete word study says, an innate more repugnance to a dishonorable act of fashion. What is a repugnant act of fashion? We're not all going to see that the same. This word modestly in the Greek is used one other time in the New Testament, also in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 3 verse 2, where it's talking about the qualifications of an elder. An elder is to have good behavior, modest behavior, or respectable behavior. Hebrews 12, verse 28 talks about having reverence and awe for God. And that's what we want to illustrate with our adornment, with our clothes. Modestly. The word modest itself, even in the English, is this idea of what? Not pushing the limits. Not trying to get as close to the line as possible. But that's often a problem we have with Christians in modesty. They have the wrong perspective. They're trying to get as close to the fashions of the world without crossing it. And you can get away with that in the world. The world won't say anything. But that's not what we're about. That's not our goal. Discreet carries the idea of soundness of mind, to use or have sound judgment, moderation of desire, passions, or conduct. The idea of self-restraint or self-control, as you see in these two passages here. But how do you define that? Well, you define that with a heart given completely to God. A heart that's going to look at some of these passages and get an idea of length and not try to push those limits. To be modest, to be discreet, to be proper. I want to tell you what, if the Bible had a specific dress code of lengths, what a great time for Paul to bring that out here. What a powerful argument that would be for Peter to use that and to bring that here, but they don't do that. They use these words and they know that these Christians who have the right heart will be able to figure it out. This is why we did that prep lesson a couple weeks ago. And really all the lessons that we've had since that have been great prep lessons. Tabernacling with God. Being a temple for the Lord. Even the Lord's Supper talk Jason gave, this transformation, this change of perspective, of goals, of will. God is about as far away from sin as possible. And we don't want to be as close to it as possible. We don't want to look at sin as just a line in the sand. As long as we don't cross that line, we're okay. It's the heart that will understand that modesty, that discreetness. And again, if we don't have that, well, then the heart needs to change first and foremost. When we hear people using the wrong language, the wrong words, words not befitting of a Christ-like manner, like Aquila, Priscilla, we take them aside and try to explain to them, we try to change the heart. But that's where sometimes when it comes to modesty, we kind of lose our mind. We've had people that we think, oh, they should know better. And we publicly embarrass them. And that's a great way to drive someone away from the Lord. And people have done that. And you've never seen those people ever again in the church. Again, as we go back to these passages, as we adorn ourselves properly, modestly, discreetly, the whole crux is by means of good works. Works that befit women and men, making a claim to godliness. Peter says the same thing. But let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit. And that idea of the imperishable quality, I don't know if this is intentional, but what comes to my mind is what? Your clothes are perishable. They get destroyed. They go out of fashion. but that quality of a gentle and quiet, godly spirit is imperishable. It won't come to an end. But before we close, let me talk a little bit about the Bible addressing what we might say is the big problem of modesty in the church today, in the world today, and that is this idea of underdressing. The Bible does speak about it. It speaks about it in a very, very direct and a very uneasy way. But it all goes back to the very beginning. Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. There we read, "And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." They were naked and they were not ashamed. As the story goes on, Genesis 3, verse 7, something changes. They knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loin coverings. Genesis 3:10. "And he said to God, I heard the sound of thee in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid myself." And God even says, "Who told you you were naked? How did you figure that out?" What is it that changed? It was sin. Sin changed that. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 21, "And the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them." And from that point on, men have and women have worn clothes. Why? Because to be out among people naked is a shameful thing, and it is shameful because of sin. And so throughout the Bible, you get this theme of the shamefulness of nakedness. You have this story early on where Ham is cursed and his son as well, Canaan, because he looked upon his father's nakedness, and it's a shameful thing. It's a shameful thing what Noah did. It's a shameful thing what Ham does. And then Shem and Japheth come about, and they take very careful steps to cover their father's nakedness and not to see it. You have passages like this in the prophets, where Isaiah 47, verse 2 and 3, God is giving this message to Babylon of how he's going to punish them and how he's going to embarrass them. And so it reads, "Take the millstones and grind meal. Remove your veil, strip off the skirt, uncover the leg, cross the rivers. Your nakedness will be uncovered, your shame also will be exposed. I will take vengeance and will not spare a man." In like manner, you have Ezekiel talking in Ezekiel 16:37. "Therefore, behold, I shall gather all your lovers with whom you took pleasure, even all those whom you loved, and all those whom you've hated. So I shall gather them against you from every direction and expose your nakedness to them, that they may see all your nakedness." It's not a fun group of passages to read, is it? But there's so many of them like that. God is going to shame these people by revealing their nakedness. And yet we have people today that are proud to do that and not ashamed. And how would you expose your nakedness today? Well, several ways you can do that. Wearing garments that reveal more nakedness. Too short, right? We can also do it by wearing form-fitting garments. And that's very popular in the world today. Why do women want to wear these form-fitting that don't reveal nakedness, but the form of the body? Well, most of them are, I want people to know my body's rocking. But that's not what a Christian's about. A Christian is about what? Modesty. being proper, being discreet. The Bible doesn't have to give you a whole dress code to figure out what it means to dress in such a way that you're not hiding, you're not blocking, you're not ignoring what you want the world to see. As Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, that you want to let your light shine so that men may see it. And what? Not glorify you, not be amazed by you, not compliment you, but glorify your Father in heaven. If we want to change in modesty, it starts with the heart. A heart given completely to God. Maybe there's one here who hasn't given themselves completely to God. I don't know if this lesson will help you with that, but it does deal with this idea that in being a child of God, and maybe that's what you need to start with. Maybe that's where you are. You need to become a Christian. You need to become a child of God. You need to be baptized. We can help you with that. But we have dealt with a lesson where it all starts with the heart. And there are hard hearts there. There are hearts that say, yes, I'm going to give Jesus some authority, but I'm going to keep some for myself. And that doesn't work. We're going to offer this invitation for anyone that we can help. We can encourage to change that heart. So not only do we dress making a claim to godliness, but we live a life that makes that claim. And when we fall short of that, praise be to God, we have the blood of Jesus Christ. We have God's grace that will forgive us of that so we can stand again to make that claim. If we can help you do that this morning, let that be known as together we stand and as we sing.